254 this morning. So you said at 254 this morning. Hey, how you doing?
How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Oh, pretty good.
I did receive it at 254 this morning.
Yeah,
That's what I did see.
really early.
Oh, you got up kind of early.
Hard to find time between school and work.
I hear you.
Do we have an order?
Do I?
Do we have an order for this?
No particular order. Yeah, I've got Ben Smith, then Nicholas, then Brayton, and then you. Hey, how's it going? Well, all the presenters are here. Thanks for showing up early, by the way. Great. I thought so. I get it wrong. Hey, how's it going?
All right, I got a flash drive containing my presentation.
Are you presenting tonight or
I believe
Thursday?
it's tonight.
I thought I had you Thursday. I got Robert, Danielle, Kendall. Is
Well, maybe it was.
that right? That's what I have you down.
It was.
that all
I'll
right?
do it. Yeah,
You
that's
on
all right.
Thursday? Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Actually, no, I did see my name on for today.
Hmm.
I do see my name for May 7th.
You see what now?
I do see my name up for May 7th.
Are you on today?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take it then.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll do it today.
I might have. Did you put yours in the uploaded it already as well too?
I don't think I did.
Okay. I have 4 already as well. Future biometrics.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Should go on.
Actually, while you're doing that, where's the uploader again?
Do I know?
The uploader for the presentations.
It's in the week 14 and 15.
Oh, okay.
There's just one assignment both weeks. It's the same assignment.
Oh, no, I meant, I was gonna upload, shit. I don't have a flash drive and I need to upload my.
You can upload it into 14 or 15, or you can just email it to me.
Oh, I emailed it to you on Canvas.
You did. You already did?
Yeah.
Was it within the assignment or a separate email?
That was a separate email saying just in case.
I think I already downloaded. Let me make sure. Come over here and we'll find out for sure. Let me get this one downloaded here first. I think I might have already got it. And I got.
Yeah.
Is that you?
That's me.
Okay.
Cool.
We're good then. yours. Bro.
All right, thank you.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Okay, make sure you've signed in to check in up here if you've not already done so. Before you leave, do that. Go over the order of presentations for the night in no particular order. It's just as they are on my computer up here. So first is Ben Smith, and then we've got,
Didn't he already win?
huh?
Didn't he already win, Bill?
Yeah, it went.
Did you already go?
Yeah, it went on like last
Oh.
Thursday.
Well, no Ben Smith then. We're gonna do yours again. I had you in the. I know why it was. I had you in the submission as well, and I downloaded it, I think. All right, so nix that. All right, Nicholas, correct? Going tonight, and then up next after that will be Brayton, and then Garrett, and then finally Elias. Is that correct? And then everybody else presenting that has not yet presented on Thursday. Wanted to make mention this Thursday I'll be bringing pizza this Thursday night, and you guys posted already an announcement what you're going to bring. If you haven't yet done so, do so. Go to the announcements. In fact, if you click on the announcement link, I think it sends you to that announcement where you can post what you want to bring. There's only a couple of you have posted, so if you want to post in there while the first presenter's coming up, that'd be awesome. And then we will go through the final presenters on Thursday. And then next week is technically finals week. I have to be here for that night. So I will be in the classroom looping your presentations on the overhead. And I will bring water and some snacks for you. If you have other finals to take, you can definitely stop in. You're not required to be here, but I am. So I will be here next week. Make sense? So this is technically our last week together on it. All right. So no further ado, I'll make sure I have my podcast is started. All right. And then also inside the announcement for week 15, there's a link for the survey. Go ahead and click on that and you'll refresh that in between each presenter, as always. Presenters, and when you present, present your name first, your title, so people can jot that down on the survey. And then at the end, since people are submitting their questions via survey, you don't have to ask, is there any questions, but you can definitely thank them for listening to your presentation. Great. Any questions before we get started? All right, come on up, sir.
Do I get the clicker?
You do get the clicker. Everybody gets the clicker. Yep. And I'm going to go ahead and go full screen here. And make sure you just point it towards this area over here and you're good to go. Yep. Yep. All right, let's get more attention.
All right. My name is Nicholas Higgins, and my presentation is on John Captain Crunch Draper and the blue boxes. Shit.
There you go.
There we go. Captain Crunch is a early telephone freak, which is like proto hacking, and one of the person who inspired Steve Woz, and Steve Jobs to get into the hardware sling business, which led to them founding Apple, which led to, well, a lot of things. He was born March 15th, 1943. He to a Air Force technician father, very strict, grew up in rural California, got in and out of trouble, got into a lot of fights, had some psychiatric evaluations, just not a super pleasant childhood, but he ended up following in the footsteps of his father. He became a radio technician for the United States Air Force. He worked in Maine and Alaska, working on radars for flyboys. And he would sort of mess around with the tech. He made a low power FM transmitter to get radio stations so there was something to do. And he had chops doing that because in high school, he made his own pirate radio station and got in trouble for it. This would be one of his many, many runs afoul of the law. He went into the Air Force in 1964. He was honorably discharged in 1969, moved down to San Jose right before it became what we know of as Silicon Valley. It was still basically the age of Aquarius, so a lot of hippies, a lot of long hair, not really bathing, a lot of pot smoking. But there was still the booming tech industry, superconductors, telephone working, all sorts of fun stuff. To make ends meet, he worked as a radio engineer and a DJ down in Cupertino. And it was there, as that DJ, he would run into the people that would get him onto the phone freak life. One day, he was doing calls. They used to have call-in numbers at the radio stations that he worked for. One of the people who called him was Danny Teresi, and it was a misdial. Danny Teresi was this blind freaker who was bouncing back and forth between switches, between telephone operators to call himself, just because that's what you did back then to show that you could. But he misdialed, and he ended up calling Captain Crunch. Captain Crunch was waiting for a phone call from one of his buddies, didn't get it. They started talking. Draper was wondering, like, how the hell did you get my number? And Danny's like, oh yeah, this is a misdial. You want to know how I did it? I called you for free. He calls him back, nothing. Calls him back a second time, nothing. Calls him back a third time, finally reaches him as like, Danny's like, oh, okay, you care about this. Let me tell you about telephones. Let me tell you about the system. They meet in secret at Danny's house because, I mean, back in the day, you would get arrested for toll fraud. It's still a crime. You can do it via like Skype or other VoIP systems. But yeah, they meet up. They meet in his house. The lights are off. Draper tells Danny to turn the lights on. He does. He finds out Danny is blind. Because a lot of the early freaks were blind people who had really good pitch and really good, like perfect pitch and perfect hearing. And they would play music like this Vox Continental electric organ, which is used for the Doors, that funky sound that they always get. You could mess around with this, take a bunch of wires, hook them up to some alligator clips, and play certain tones on the organ that would correspond to dial tones, start tones, switch over tones, and basically give you the keys to AT&T's kingdom. Now, I've been talking about freaks, I've been talking about freakers. What is a freak? What is a freaker? Freaking is the act of gaining illegal access to resources of telecom networks for fun or malicious activity. Whereas a freak is someone who loves exploring the telephone system and experimenting with it to understand how it works. If you replace telephones with computers, you have hacking and hackers. In fact, fun fact, the term hacker, as we know it now, like computer hackers, was coined in MIT in 1963 for people messing with the telephone systems using computers. And this is what you do. You dial a toll-free number to cover your butt from AT&T and the FBI and et cetera. You dial in, you play a tone at 2600 hertz, which is a very high A. Like one of the early freaks, John and the Joy Bubbles, was able to whistle exact 2600 pitch because he had perfect pitch because he was blind. So you make that noise, you make that tone, it caused the AT&T telephone system to put you in a standby mode where like a long distance line cuts, the phone you have goes into operator mode, and once you have that tone down, you're in standby. You can play certain tones either by whistling, by organ, or getting like a tape that had the correct numbers. For certain dial tones, you play those master tones, and in a certain order, it would get you anywhere you needed to go. Like whatever you wanted to do, you'd go through every operator, go through whatever switch. You could call Abu Dhabi, Abu Dhabi to London, London to Japan, Japan to China, China back over to the United States, and call yourself. One of the things Captain Crunch loved to do was just do a switch over, just a bunch of switchovers to call his own phone and hear himself from 20 minutes into the future, 20 seconds into the past. It was the early 70s pot. So Joy Bubbles was Johnny Ingresa, the original phone freak. He he was at South Florida Technical University, realized with his perfect pitch, he could whistle a specific tone that the phone system would do and get free calls. And then eventually him and a bunch of other tech dudes found a technical manual from Bell Systems explaining every master tone that could be used to do everything on the AT&T network. And back in the day, AT&T was a monopoly. Like if you had telephone service in America or in other parts of the country or in other countries, it was AT&T, or it was run on the same system, on the same bands that AT&T, back then Bell Systems, was called. And the thing that gave Captain Crunch his name was this. Captain Crunch toy bosun whistle. If you got it in boxes of Captain Crunch, and if you cover a certain hole and you blew into it, it would make the exact 2600 hertz sound that you needed. It wasn't actually John Draper who came up with it. It was Sid Burnett, another hacker another phone freak who had come up with it about 3-4 years earlier. Captain Crunch got called Captain Crunch because he was the one who was interviewed by Esquire about all of this. Speaking of which, Draper was asked to build a blue box, which is a machine, also called an MFer, a multi-frequency generator, by Teresi and Fetgather, Teresi's friend, who actually used the Doors organ, who showed Draper the Doors organ being able to access the phone lines. He's so entranced by the technology, by the ability to just hack the system, that he builds a blue box that night. Steve Wozniak would do something very similar after reading the Esquire article of Captain Crunch in 1971. So does it in a night, gets it done, hangs out with Teresi and Fetgather, realizes that there's money to be made in these, that it's not just tech nerds, it's not just freaks who would want this, but bookies and celebrities and criminals, really, would all just want free phone, like free phone service, free long distance phone service. So he perfects the system, sells it for $1,500 in 1970s money, which is like $5,000 in current currency. He becomes such a big name, so well known for it, that he's interviewed by Esquire in October 1971. The Secret of the Little Blue Box. It's one of the sort of defining articles of hacker culture. In fact, the 2600 hertz sound, because of this article, is the moniker for the Hackers Quarterly 2600. So he gets that interview. It's a huge hit. He becomes this big noise in the national Silicon Valley tech scene, and he also gets arrested for toll fraud several times. This is actually the blue box. Like you hook it up to a receiver, You enter those, you would press the buttons like it was a regular phone. You clear to just like de-trunk in case the cops were coming. Actually, in the interview in Esquire, Captain Crunch said that he had built these boxes for some bookies, a crime syndicate in Vegas, and it had all sorts of spy stuff, like it burned out the filaments, it would just shut itself off, it had a bunch of fail safes. It was just real James Bond stuff. It was super cool. So, like I said, the Esquire article inspires Steve Woz and Steve Jobs to make blue boxes. They read the article, 1973. They go out, they start researching the technical manuals. They find the Bell Systems manual with all of the master tones, which you can no longer find because AT&T's like, no, we don't want you to get free service anymore. They find it out, they build it in a day or so. They actually contact Captain Crunch once he gets out of jail for toll fraud. Captain Crunch, comes to Berkeley, comes to Woz's dorm, meets Woz, sees his box, says Woz's box sucks because Woz's was crude and it made square waves, which would actually sort of mess with the frequency, wouldn't work as well, and it would get you caught. Whereas his were sine waves and played a lot better. Woz was enthralled with the man. Jobs was enthralled with the man. Captain Crunch gave them like properly working boxes. They almost got arrested Woz and Jobs almost got arrested driving back to Steve Jobs' place, and I actually don't remember or care, but they almost got arrested because like having blue boxes was illegal, and Woz had Captain Crunch's too. So they do that, they almost get arrested. They manage to not get arrested. They catch the spark. Woz and Crunch would work together for decades, like up until 2009. They were Captain Crunch and Wozniak were chief technical officers for a streaming service, N to Go or something. It didn't make any money and it went out of business really quick. But they were still working together off and on like a decade ago. So Woz and Crunch are intertwined for a while. Captain Crunch goes to prison for toll fraud in 1975 and then does another stint in 1976. He's put on work release. He goes to Woz, who has now started Apple, and works with him on a circuit board called the Charlie board, which would allow you to get like all sorts of long distance calls. It was a proto modem essentially. Apple was like, "No, we're not going to do this." AT&T was like, "If you do this, if you let this man make this thing that can connect to our systems, we're going to sue the pants off of you." And Steve Jobs was like, "Nope." The rest of Apple was like, "Nope." Woz was like, "Oh, but it's cool." And the rest of Apple's like, "No, we're not dealing with this." So that never sees the light of day. Although a lot of the work Draper did on that ends up in like voicemail and all sorts of stuff that we use now. Goes to prison again for toll fraud. Comes back, develops the first word processor program for the Apple II, Easy Rider, and for IBM PCs, Easy Rider, the port. He goes to prison again in 1988 because he's implicated in a scam for like public transit in San Fran. He was given a job in 1986 by one of the co-founders of AppDesk. He goes to jail in 1988. He's on the payroll until 1989 when the co-founder just has to let him go. He manages to keep himself clean for a while, for a couple of years. He becomes an activist. He starts doing the talk circuit. He starts defending internet privacy, becomes a white hat hacker in 2001. He has another couple of failed businesses. 2017, he gets barred from several hacking conferences, DEF CON, HOPE, TORCON, some others, for allegations of sexual misconduct. He says that it's some applied kinesiology, which is like a quack science that he said helped his back. But one of the things with the exercise is he may or may not have popped boners during it, and that was considered sexual misconduct. So, yeah, who is Crunchman? He's a counterculture icon. When the idea of the hacker, the sort of wide-eyed, vaguely immoral, just enthusiastic criminal, was basically formed by Captain Crunch in 1971. That Esquire article made the idea of what we think of a hacker now. He is a career criminal, wide-eyed tech nerd, white hat hacker, privacy advocate, public speaker, general icon, general loser, digital nomad, really beardy dude. Like, if you think of an old computer nerd, if you think of an old hacker, you're imagining Draper, you're imagining Captain Crunch. And actually, he ended up as a shout out in Ready Player One, so that's something too. But his mantra, and really the hacker's mantra in general, is if I do what I do, it's only to explore a system. Now, whether or not you believe that, that's up to you in the cybersecurity world. We're excited? More we're excited? We're excited 3, the quest for more money. Thank you very much. That's my presentation.
Good man, good job. All right. Good job.
Thank you.
All right, next up, refresh your surveys. Next up, we have the Enigma written. And advance, go back, and you'll have to point it towards this, baby. It'll work fine, but you'll just have to point it towards that till we get it to advance. All right, let's give more attention.
All right, so I assume everybody here, or sorry, let me say that. My name's Brayton. I'm doing a presentation on Alan Turing and the Enigma machine from World War II. So I assume everybody's heard about, World War II and all the fun stuff that happened there. And like, more importantly, the bigger stuff like the bombs dropping and how all that stuff ended. But did you guys hear about the big cryptographic battle that was going on between Alan Turing and the entire German army? That one's a little less known about. So this is Alan Turing. He was born in London in 1912. He studied undergraduate at Cambridge University with a focus on quantum mechanics, probability, and logic, and then he excelled in that. So then he moved on to the University of Princeton, where he achieved his PhD in logic, algebra, and number theory. His whole life, he really excelled in mathematics as a whole and logic, so it kind of paved the way for him to get into computer programming and stuff like that. For a job, he worked part-time in the British government's Code and Cipher School, which is pretty prestigious, and that kind of paved the way for when World War II started. He actually got a full-time job at the Birchley Park, which is like the top secret headquarters where all the code breaking took place through World War II. So what he's pretty famous for was the creation of the Turing machine. So it was kind of a thought experiment put forth by him in 1936, and the idea was that any problem that you could present to it that could be logically solved, that this machine could solve, and it turned out to be the case. So this is the most basic level of computation, just ones and zeros you go through, and then you get out an answer. It's still used as the golden standard for today. It's any program, any executable that is run and it's successful, it's known as Turing complete. And this means that it has like any if Boolean phrases and Boolean phrases, stuff like that, to kind of like carry you through. So if this occurs, then this occurs, and then so on and so forth. And then so the creation of the Turing machine was kind of important because in World War II, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the Turing machine is very simple, very basic. It has 3 operations: read, write, and move. And up here, like you can see, read, write, move. So it reads the first, and it says it's a 0. So it writes 1, moves left. And here, 1, writes 0, move left, so on and so forth, until you reach the halt, which is up at the top, where it's at, finally it's at a blank, so it does nothing. And that's pretty much a set of rules that relies on a big, infinitely long roll of tape that resides within the machine. And the stuff on that piece of tape is any kind of rule set that allows you to manipulate whatever you want, and then the data that you're manipulating. So then past that is the Enigma machine, which was a rotor machine. Rotor machines were commonly used back between the 20s and the 70s to encrypt messages that were being sent, and then the Germans took it one step further with the Enigma machine, kind of mechanized the process of encryption and decryption to take the human aspect out of it, so it's more efficient, more secure, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's used very heavily in World War II by the Germans, mainly the Germans. So this is just kind of like a little GIF I found to represent it. So you type in your message number file, and when you type in an N, a Y goes through. You type in a U, a T comes out. It just kind of randomizes it. That way, when the person receives the message, if they don't have the key required to decrypt it, then it's got a bunch of gibberish. When a letter is pressed, a different letter is sent. Uses a key system to encrypt and decrypt. So if I send you the message and you have the same key that I used to encrypt it, you can decrypt it. Obviously, somebody who intercepts it, which is something that the Allies did a lot with the German communications, even though they had the message, it didn't mean anything because they didn't have the keys. And it got to the point where over the course of the years of the war, the Allies had so much success cracking it that they went to changing the ciphers daily, and that was just a pain on the Allies side. So to combat this, Alan Turing and another code breaker by the name of Gordon Welchman created the BOM, which was essentially a big code breaking machine designed specifically to combat the Enigma machine and the Enigma code that the Germans had created. So it was a absolute mammoth of a machine, 7 feet wide, 6.5 feet tall, weighed literally over a ton. A lot of hardware there, and costs £1 million, which is 4 million pounds today, or 100,000 pounds, which is 4 million pounds today. So pretty hefty piece of equipment in terms of size and price and all that fun stuff. And the reason this piece of machinery was so successful is it actually held 36 Enigma machines inside of it. So that way, when they intercepted a communique or whatever from the German troops, they could run it through the ciphers and try to get as many matches as they could, just to kind of help alleviate and shorten down the process. Very, very forward-thinking machine that kind of paved the way for a lot of the computation stuff that we do today. So the impact on the war, at its peak, they had 211 bomb systems spread throughout Britain. They spread them out. So let's say the main location gets bombed, there's 210 other machines laying around that they can use. So they're not, putting all their eggs in one basket. At its peak, with all those machines running, they intercepted as many as 3,000 messages a day for a grand total of 2.5 million messages overall, which they, gave invaluable information to the Allies. Yeah. Gave Allies extremely important tactical info, saved the lives of countless people, warned of ambushes, other U-boat groups called wolf packs that were very bad at, or very good at doing bad things like taking out American or Allied group shipments and stuff like that. Terrible stuff. So the bomb created by Turing was estimated to have shaved about 2 years off the war. So very helpful. So the impact on it today is Turing's idea from way back when with the Turing machine still holds true with the computation that we have. If any computationally logical thing the Turing machine could do, given enough time and enough tape, little limitation there, but with that computational jump that he gave us, that's what we're using today. And then through the war between Turing and the Germans, they advancements in cryptography to take us where we are today. Without that war, who knows where we'd be? Probably not as secure, that's for sure. But here's my references.
All right, good job. Good hand. Yeah, if you've not seen the Imitation Game, is that right?
Yeah.
Imitation Game movie, you want to see, it's about his life and goes into more detail on his, he did get a posthumous award few years back, he did not get notoriety for his work until way after he passed. But if you get to see the Imitation Game, definitely see it. It's worth it. All right, next, Garrett, and then everybody refresh your surveys. And Garrett, I'll show you how to run this real quick.
All right.
So what you want to do is you want to come around this way. You'll want to point towards this area here when you're that's advancing it. Go back, and there's a pointer there if you need to use it.
All right.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, it's all yours.
All right.
Give Garrett our attention.
Well, hello. My name is Garrett Conover, and I'm going to present to you the future of biometrics and security. So let's see what we can do here. Where can you find biometrics being used? Well, currently you can find biometrics being used in, well, just about everywhere. You can find them being used in like healthcare, schools, banks, immigration, and law enforcement. You also find it being used in military, especially. They've been using like retina scanners like since the 1950s for some military bases. Yeah. So, what is new and upcoming? Well, as you might know, pretty much your phone is probably the one thing that everyone has like access to, like some sort of biometric security system for it. The basic one you probably find is like fingerprints, or like the ridge scanners that they usually have, so that you can swipe over. But nowadays, we're going to be getting some retina and iris scanners. Typically, the iris scanners are a little less intrusive because it only requires like a camera capture of your iris, which is like right on the like surface. It's that in terms of like your eye color. It's pretty much that. But the retina scanner basically beams a light into your eyeball. It captures like the capillaries that are like right in the very back. It's supposed to be like a unique identifier. But I've been reading up like it can be like there can be like mismatches if you have like glaucoma or any other like eye degradation, or if you're like using like substances like marijuana can kind of alter that. Yeah, so, and another thing that's brand new exciting, well, maybe to some of you anyway, is this internet protocol called FIDO2. It's basically like a way to, instead of using like a login password for like your normal internet account, you can just hook up like a little fingerprint scanner and just use your own fingerprint to identify that. The only problem with that now is it's pretty limited. Not a lot of websites support that. So you might not see that right away, but if it gains enough popularity, and hey, you might see it come around sooner than you think. And then another interesting thing is biometric-based AI. Now, that is actually starting to be used in like airports. If you like ever use like a fast lane at like an airport, I don't know if the one out of Chicago, O'Hare has one, but essentially they would get like a face scan of you, and it could just go right through like a fast lane. It goes through pretty much a fast, seamless security checkout. So that could pretty much alter like the hindrance that current airports have. It's usually just a big slog of long lines. All right, so how does biometrics stack up against passwords? Well, passwords, I mean, even though they're kind of considered obsolete against biometrics, they still have their unique pros to them. For one thing, I mean, basically every website like that uses like an account, they're going to be using that. It's simple. They can set it up easily. So you just see pretty much that. And then once it's compromised, you can just easily change it. And the cons, well, it can be hacked remotely for one thing. So basically anybody from like the Ukraine can just get access to your account if you don't want to have that. And and it's also your passwords can be easily forgettable. I mean, if you set up like an account for like, I don't know, for like a home insurance policy and you never check that in like 5 years, you're probably not going to remember that password unless you've written it down or used like a password manager. But anyway, for biometrics, one of the pros is they can ensure a high degree of user certainty. And there's no need to memorize a set of characters. It's kind of harder to manipulate because usually in order to like hack into those things, you need to like get access to whoever's biometrics. And some guy in the Ukraine is not going to have like easy access to that right away. And it's just harder to hack remotely. But I can get to that because it's not like impossible to do. And it's just considered to be more convenient with a stronger set of security. But it does have its cons to it though. For one thing, I mean, it has limited availability to devices. You're not going to find biometrics used on every single piece of equipment that you're going to come across. And the main concern really is once it's stolen, you can't replace that. Your whole biometric template there is just completely useless now. Essentially, your ID is stolen. Any more concerns? Yep, you do. I do apologize. I didn't realize that I used like Libre Office, and I didn't realize that I was going to set up like that.
That's all right.
So it's something like kind of thrown off by that. Like, oh geez. But anyway, one of the main concerns is your privacy. There's a pretty big concern that either like companies or the government might use that data to either like profile you or set like a tailored set of like advertisements, either through like whatever means, or they even sell that off to like other third parties, essentially. So basically, you have a less degree of privacy, and it get used for databases. If like the database that stores like the biometric templates gets hacked, it's essentially you're gonna have a whole bunch of people that are gonna lose their entire identity. In fact, the biggest biometric database is out in India. They use it to profile and keep track of like all their citizens. It's been useful for them on one end because most of them can't like get access to like their banks or any other things, and they don't have like any proper identification, so they just use like just some biometric identification like face scans and maybe even like fingerprints. But unfortunately though, that database has been hacked many times, and the government's just really just struggling to like keep up with all that, and they're just kind of like obfuscating like, oh, it's not really our fault that it got hacked. It's more of like, oh, it's just being misused improperly. So there's about 1.19 billion people that have their ID just floating around. In fact, you can actually go to WhatsApp and buy somebody's ID for $10. It's pretty reasonably cheap there. And another concern is with spoofing, which would be basically somebody stealing like somebody else's identity or trying to impersonate somebody to get through like a biometric identifier. And they would just like lift that, like either like a fingerprint or get like a little mask that has like a really high detailed picture of like your face in order to get through like whatever device that it might have. And obfuscation would be more of like a concern for like airport security. Like if somebody's trying to hide their face from like the cameras, they're trying to slip through all that security. And another big concern is instead of like the item or device itself becoming like the main target, you would become the main target. Like if somebody decided to steal your brand new phone, they might assault you and actually force you to unlock that, which you probably don't want to happen. And in fact, in 2005, a Malaysian car thief severed the finger of an owner of a Mercedes brand S class, and they attempted to steal the car. And when I read the article, it didn't really make certain if they actually managed to get the finger to actually work with the car. It just sounded like they just abandoned the guy in his car on the road, essentially. But that's a pretty big concern if that's what you have, and they don't know what else to do. They just decide to attack you and brutally maim you. But there are solutions to these problems that we can address. For privacy, we can definitely advocate for more stricter privacy laws. Just call up your congressman or senator and tell them, hey, you were really concerned about your privacy with this new upcoming biometric data. It might make them actually act on that unless they've been completely bribed by the other side. And another thing you could do, you could read the company's privacy policies, and you could tell them after read through all that long of text and jargon and find something that you just don't like, you could just tell them, hey, I don't like this. I don't like what you're doing here. Please change it, otherwise I won't buy your product or use it. But what I found interesting, though, is Illinois actually has one of the strongest biometric information privacy laws. It's called BIPA. And basically what it does is prohibits entities from collecting or capturing, purchasing, or obtaining a person's biometric identifier. So companies can't just collect your biometric data. But I heard that Facebook is actually trying to get this law, they're trying to get that law removed so they could actually just do that. So we'll have to see how that turns out in the future. Yeah. And for spoofing, well, there's actually plenty of solutions for this. For one thing, you use multi-factor or biometrics. So you can, instead of just using one identifier, you can use multiple, or even later the password. That would usually make it a lot more difficult for people to obtain that. And you can also implement a high fidelity mechanism. That's what the FBI uses. It's a much more detailed identifier than what you'll find on your phones. Essentially, every little ridge of your finger. It's just multiple layers of photos that they capture. It's just a lot more work that goes into that and to authenticate you. And also just put a human to verify, because if you see something suspicious, like a guy wearing a picture of a face from a mask, or trying to slip through security, I mean, that humans probably going to identify that a lot quicker than what the AI can come up with currently. And for yourself, well, basically, sometimes you might just have to be prepared to defend yourself, call the police. If you think you're being stalked, just take a reasonable concern of your surroundings. Just do that. So what is the future of biometrics and security? And this is just my own opinion. I do think that it's going to become more common. It's pretty slow at first, but I think as time goes on, you're going to see a lot more products that just offer just biometric securities, whether it be fingerprint scanners, iris scanners. Who knows? Maybe even like take a sample of your DNA or something crazy like that. Yeah, and I don't think passwords are going to go away immediately, because I think for one thing, I think there's going to be a group of people or the population that are just not going to deal with biometrics whatsoever, and they'll just keep on using password login information. And I also think companies might, in order to kind of cheapen, like do a like cheap way of upping their security, layer with like biometrics and a password. And I think more privacy laws will be passed, because I think most people are going to be creeped out by all these entities coming in, collecting their data like they kind of already do now. Kind of want stricter policies, but I think they're with continuing with like biometrics, that is like a part of you. So I think there's like a lot more weight to that rather than just, I don't know, like your profile on Facebook. And I did skip over behavioral biometrics, but I think it'll start becoming a little bit more sophisticated and probably authenticate a little bit better. And I think that, yeah, just more general things will be utilized. Maybe even things that are just seem nonsensical to use, like a biometric toaster or microwave. Perhaps, I mean, you never know. Somebody might be willing to buy that. And this is a slide that I put up just to ask you like what your opinion is if you use biometrics. Makes what you think about it, if you think it's going to be the way of the future or maybe not. Just general stuff about that. And here's the sources that are used. And those are the picture source.
Well, that's a good hand. Good job.
All right. Thanks.
All right, Elias, come on up and go ahead and refresh your surveys as he comes up. Okay, so that's advance, that's back, and that's the pointer. Just make sure and point it towards this area here. That's the USB it's going to use on. Yep. All right, let's give Elias our attention. After this last presenter, once you're finished with the survey, please go ahead. This is the last class in here, so if you go ahead and shut down your computer, that'd be awesome. And then the rest of the presenters Thursday. And everybody gonna bring stuff, right? All right, it's all yours.
Okay, my name is Elias Novella. I did my presentation on public key encryption. It was originally on two specific types of encryption methods, but it's better to actually understand what public key encryption is before I can even get to those two types of methods. So we're all in a security class. We probably all know what encryption is, but the basic idea is you want to send information to a specific party, and you want that information so that they can read what you're sending to them, but no one else can. So that if someone intercepts that message, whether that's through the use of hacking, or maybe it's the actual providers of the switches and routers or the government, you don't want them to actually be able to figure out what you're sending. And this is important for simple stuff like you're telling your friend a secret, or it's banking information that you don't want anyone to have access to. There's two broad categories of encryption. There's the conventional, also known as private key, also known as symmetrical encryption. And this is sort of usually the type of encryption you think of first when you are teaching encryption or when you're trying to conceptualize what it is. And this means that when you encrypt a message, you're using a private key. This is the key that both you and the receiver both know and no one else knows. And part of the problem with the conventional method is that a private key has to be kept secret by both parties. No one else can know about their key, and you have to be able to somehow transmit this key to the other person. If you're establishing an internet connection, it's harder to be able to transmit that information securely because you're not like face to face with a person. So you can't just like whisper over and say like, this is the key. You have to be able to send the key privately in some way. And if you're already sending information over without encrypting it, then that information isn't secure. So your private key isn't secure in the first place. So what was developed were public keys. Public keys doesn't actually take away private keys entirely. It relies on a private key and a private key. The public key is made available to the general public. You can kind of just put on your website, use certificates to allow people to gain access to it. And the biggest benefit of using public keys is that you only need a single pair. One public key always goes with one private key. In the instance where if you were to just use the conventional method and use private keys only, you would have to have a private key for each individual you're talking to. So in the situation of a bank, they would have to have a private key to talk to every single person. And if a bank has hundreds, thousands, potentially millions of customers, they would have to develop a key for every single individual, which is just not feasible. But in a public key method, you can just provide everyone with a single public key, which they can use to encrypt their data. And then only the bank can decrypt the information. So that just removes a lot of hassle for individuals. And it is important that every public key goes to only one private key, because another benefit of using public keys is that they work both ways. A company that has a private key can encrypt information using that private key, and the public key will actually decrypt it as well. So it goes both ways. And what this allows you to do is it allows companies or anyone who is sending out encrypted information using the private key, you know that because the public key only goes to one private key, that information only could have come from one person. So it's a good way to do signatures. Like if you send an email and you encrypt it with your private key, everyone who has the access to the public key knows that you are the person who sent that email. So it's very good for authentication. So there's many ways to do public key encryption. I'm just going to talk about two. One of them is RSA. That's sort of the standard. And I'm also going to talk about elliptical cryptography, also just called ECC. But there are other ones, Deadly Helpman, Palia, Dragon and many more. But I have 10 minutes to talk about this presentation. The RSA, it's named after the three people who sort of developed it. There was actually another individual who developed it concurrently, but these guys kind of just get the credit. They just kind of had more sway in the community at the time. The three, Raivesh, Jamir, Edelman, they developed it in the 1970s, and it was first publicly announced in 1978. And so it is the standard that most encryption is done for and has been done for decades. And all public keys cryptography is based on a trapdoor algorithm. And a trapdoor algorithm basically means that if you take a message, you can apply the encryption one way very easily, but a decryption is much harder unless you know the specific key. In the case of RSA, this is done through multiplication and factoring. So RSA takes two prime numbers, and you can multiply them together to get a product. And I'm not going to explain the entire process because it would kind of take a while, and there's also just a bunch of math that I don't think anyone wants to go through. But you can develop a public key using prime numbers, and also develop your private key using prime numbers. And the reason this works, the reason you can't just like figure out what the private key is from the public key and from the other numbers you're using in that public key, is because multiplying prime numbers is very easy. The computer can do that pretty quickly, but taking a very large number that is the product of two primes, it's very difficult to actually factor that. So this is just, I'm using the fact that computers are very good at multiplying numbers together, but it takes them significantly longer to be able to factor them. And of using that fact, you can create public and private keys. And there's some math if you want to look at it. The presentation's available, but it could take like 2 lectures of math course to actually properly explain the math behind this. I don't have time to do that. So how secure is RSA? Well, at the time it was very secure, and you can always make keys more secure by kind of just making the keys longer. So if you take the number 13 and 7 as your part of your public and private key, that's going to be pretty easy to crack. If you take numbers that are in the millions or billions, or now we get to just large blocks of numbers that are your prime numbers, that gets harder to crack. But one of the difficulties with RSA is that there has been progress in this problem of factoring large numbers. There's a lot of smart people who just work on factoring as a problem, and they have been able to develop algorithms that are significantly better than sort of like the naive brute force way to do it. And the biggest problem and those algorithms make it go faster, but the biggest problem that those algorithms present is that they actually get more efficient as time goes on. As you make your keys bigger, they actually get more efficient. So like just using like random numbers, let's say that you make your key size 10 times longer because computers are getting better, and they're getting better at just brute forcing solutions. So you make your key 10 times longer to increase security. Because of the algorithms that we have available, you might have made like the computational aspect of it like 10 times worse for you, but it might only take the algorithm like 1.5 times as long to actually crack it. So the cost, you have burdened more costs than what is actually being secured. And if as you increase the size of your keys, the algorithm is just catching up much faster. And you can't just infinitely increase the size of the keys because there's low-end devices, and especially in our current situation, we use mobile a lot. So if you make your key way too big and you're like trying to navigate a bank app, if it takes like 10 seconds to load every single link and page you go to, no one's going to want to experience that. It's sort of the conundrum we've kind of dealt with all semester, the convenience versus security. And RSA poses a big problem, a big barrier there. But it does still have its place. Another problem with the RSA, it's a pretty slow algorithm. Public key encryption tends to be slower than private key encryption. And RSA in particular is slower. But you can actually use public key encryption in combination with private key encryption. So you could set up a public and private key to set up the initial connection, and then exchange private keys, sort of like what we did on Thunderbird to do the email. It's a similar process. You use public and private keys to set up the initial contact, and once you have a secure connection and someone you can trust, you can use then private keys to do any further communication. So it's still used in that way, and it's still used in a lot of, it's still the standard. We kind of haven't reached the breaking point yet as far as like how large are we willing to make these keys in order to keep using them. But as computers get better over time, obviously eventually we'll reach a point where they're not really usable. So I hand-waved a lot of the math in RSA. I'm going to hand-wave even more of the math in elliptical curve cryptography. Elliptical curves as it's a pretty abstract field in mathematics. It doesn't actually have that many practical applications. It just turns out that cryptography is one of the few that it does have. It was developed like not actually like only a decade after RSA, but despite only being at like 10 years or less than 10 years younger, there has been no real progress in being able to actually like develop the similar types of algorithms as that you have for RSA. So elliptical curves, that's an example of an elliptical curve. It's a specific type of graph, and elliptical curve cryptography specifically uses prime elliptical curves. It there's some there's a lot of math. You basically have to multiply points together on the graph, and depending on how many times you multiply the point by itself, you will reach a number. And if you look at the end result and the initial point you had, you can't actually determine how many steps you took to get to that final point. And that the fact that you can't figure that out is what makes your private key. As far as like all of the underlying math, it's way too complicated. I kind of barely understood it. But the theory is sound from everything that I've read. And just like as a comparison to RSA, if you take a key size of 256-bit key size for ECC, that has the same security level as a 3072-bit size RSA key, which is such a significant decrease in the amount of computational power your devices have to go to actually have a secure connection. And like at 384 bits, you've only increased the bit size on an ECC kit by about 100. You've more than doubled the amount in an RSA kit, which just goes to show that it gets way more efficient when you're using RSA to actually crack these keys. And that number 384 is actually pretty important because I think up until 2013, that was actually the standard that the US government would use to encrypt like their highest level of secure information. And they haven't been able to develop any algorithms to make this any way faster. But there is a big downside to ECC, and that's how do you actually generate these curves, because it is pretty complicated math. It's pretty easy to generate random prime numbers to use for RSA, but for ECC, it's significantly harder to figure out what kind of curve to have, what parameters does it have to have, and which ones can we use that are actually secure. So there actually was an incident because there was an institution, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that actually have an algorithm to produce, but they actually found out that the institution actually implemented a backdoor, so the elliptical curves they were supplying weren't actually, they were secure in theory, but they were kind of manipulating the algorithm, so only gave people like a specific subset of curves, which made it much easier for the institute to crack. And if the institute can crack it, that means potentially anyone could crack it, which kind of halted the use of ECC because the US government was kind of telling people this is the new standard, this is what we should be going for in the future. But the fact that this backdoor problem came up kind of scared everyone away from actually using it. So that's really the biggest problem. We don't have a very good way of generating these elliptical curves. Big companies like Google can do it because they're a multi-billion-dollar company. They have the resources to actually figure out which curves are secure. But for like a local business, that's significantly harder. And so they kind of taken a back step, but the underlying theory of elliptical curves cryptography is still secure if you can find a way to actually generate these. And that's it.
Want to finish up your survey, and then everyone else finish it on Thursday. Good presentations tonight. All of them are good, diverse presentations, and been recorded, so it'll be on the week 15 lab, also along with everybody's presentation will be uploaded as well. So good job tonight, everybody. And then make sure to bring your stuff Thursday. and have a little party on Thursday. Sound good? Cool. Good job.